Jamaatul Muslimin, Alhamdulillah, thumma Alhamdulillah. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity to attain knowledge. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant it to be an extreme weight on our scales in our favor on the day of Qiyamah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Previously we spoke about Surah Al-Tariq, and in there we mentioned how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it clear that there are things in this universe that we are not aware of. Things that if we choose to not follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will remain unaware of it. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had started most of these surah with a qasam. Right? A qasam is a sumbah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next surah, which is Surah Al-Buruj, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسماء ذات البروج. Now, like we mentioned last week, that there are so many signs in the Quran, right, that people have come to learn about only in the past, let's say 500 years. Information about the outer space, information about the deeper souls in the earth, things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned to the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam 1400 years ago, has already been mentioned, and these people are only discovering it now. And this is one thing that, as Muslimin, we should be proud of, because it shows that we are on the haqq. It shows that what we are following is indeed the truth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like I mentioned last week, that there is a verse in the Bible where Jesus had told these people that there is still many things that He would want to tell them, but they are not ready for it. And through the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, we see how that information is being brought forward. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now speaks in the surah and says, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتُ الْبُرُوجِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here again makes a qasam using the samawat. And like I mentioned before, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a qasam, it is always by something great. And something that is great towards mankind. And the samawat that we see on top of us, we can only see the first level, but the samawat that is above us has great importance to mankind, even the one that we see. Right? It decides when it is the time that we wake up, when is the time that we go sleep, when do we make our salawat, when do we start fasting, when do we break our fast. All of these things, we are dependent on that sama. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a qasam, there is always great importance to it, because it is extremely important to mankind. And here when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now makes a qasam and says Dhatil Buruj, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the stars that you find in the sky. There are different opinions on what Buruj is. Some say it is castles, but majority of the ulama, they say it has to do with the orbit of the moon and the sun and the stars. And the reason why you can look at it as something that is extremely important is because all of these things that is in outer space moves in a system that we don't fully understand. We know that the sun and the moon rotates, or at least we know that the moon rotates and the earth rotates, but we don't understand exactly what is it that causes it to rotate. We understand that there are certain systems in space that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Muslimin, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed it there in order to help us flourish on this dunya, but we don't understand exactly what is it that causes it, aside from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will for it to happen so. So when it comes to these ayat, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us this idea so that we can understand that the qasam, the sumbah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making, it means that whatever comes after that is even greater. That whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to tell us, it's something we need to take note of. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Buruj, Imam Ibn Kathir, he says, Al-Buruj is what the stars that you find in the sky. And he goes back to the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا. That glorified is He, the one who has created in the samawat and nujum, the stars, وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا, and a moon that is shining bright. And Ibn Abbas, rahmahullah, he also, in his tafseer, says that this refers to the moon, the stars that we find in the samawat. In the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ. يَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ, the word maw'ud means a date. Right? For example, if you tell someone, look, I'm going to set a date, we will meet on this day. Right? That is a maw'id. Right? Maw'id means an appointment. You go to the doctor, you set an appointment, you say you setting a maw'id. Now the word wa'ad means a promise. Now whenever you go and you make an appointment, You are promising that you will be there. Right? That is why people say if you're not going to come to your appointment, please cancel ahead of time. Right? So it's a promise that you're making that you're going to be there. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wal yawmil maw'ud, ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to the day of Qiyamah, the promised day. That this day will come whether we like it or not. This day will come whether we are having the best time of our life, whether we are having the worst time of our life, this day will happen, without a doubt. And it is a promised day. Alright? There is not going to be a call that says, look, I'm cancelling this day for another time. No. That day is promised, it will happen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَشَاهِدِ وَمَشْهُودِ. And yet the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah, says, وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَعُودِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that it is the day of Qiyamah, وَشَاهِدٍ يَوْمُ الْجُمْعَةِ. And this shahid is the day of Yawm al-Jum'ah. وَمَا طَلَعَتِ الشَّمْسُ وَلَا غَرَبَتْ عَلَى أَيِّ يَوْمٍ أَفْضَلْ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ. The Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says that the sun has not risen nor set on a day that is more favorable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the day of Yawm al-Jum'ah. In other words, the blessings that we get from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Jum'ah is like on any other day. Alright? فيه ساعة لا يفاوقها عبد مسلم يسأل الله فيه خيرا إلا أعطاه إياها. He says that there's an hour within this day, right? And if you go to the Arab countries, you will always find that the shuyukh, when they are finishing off their khutbah, they will always mention this piece, and they will say that on the day of Jum'ah there is an hour where everything is accepted, right? And the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam confirms this in the hadith that anything that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of khair, within that hour it will be given to you. Right? Anything that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you from, the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says, min shar, and you seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection on the day of Yawm al-Jum'ah, within that hour, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect you on that day. Alright? وَمَشْهُودٌ, the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam then says, هُوَ يَوْمُ عَرَفَةٍ. That is, it is the day of Arafah. Now amongst the ulama, there are different interpretations or different understandings to what shahid and mashhud. Because the word shahid means someone that has witnessed. Right? They have witnessed something. And mashhud, or it can mean someone that is witnessing for someone else. And mashhud means someone that you are witnessing for. Alright? So shahid is the one that is witnessing. I come forward, I step forward, I say, I have witnessed this thing and so on that has happened, and I am testifying to it. And mashhud is the person that I'm testifying for. So there is difference of opinion amongst the ulama when it comes to what exactly is shahid and mashhud. But the hadith of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says, again, Inna Sayyid al-Ayyam al-Jum'ah wa huwa shahid wal mashhud yawm Arafah. In another hadith, the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says that the master of all days, in other words, the one that is above all other days, is Yawm al-Jum'ah. وَهُوَ الشَّاهِد, and it is the shahid, وَالْمَشْهُود يَوْمُ عَرَفَةٍ, and the mashhud is the day of Arafah. Ibn Jarir, he says that a shahid here is the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Right? In other words, the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam is going to be a witness for each and every one of us for our iman on the day of Qiyamah. Right? We know there are hadith where the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam had mentioned, a hadith Qudsi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take certain slaves out of that circle of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam on the day of Qiyamah. And the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam will say, Ya Rabbi, this is my slave, this is my companion or my follower. You know, he's part of my ummah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, you don't know what he did in your absence. So the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam automatically is a witness for each and every one of us. That is why we make dua that the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam intercedes for us as a witness, right? Because the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam will stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and will be that witness for you, that Ya Rabbi, this person, I bear witness that they have completed all of the obligatory rituals and the obedience to you, Ya Allah. Right? Wal mashhud is Yawm al-Qiyamah. So they say the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, he is the shahid, and the mashhud is the day of Qiyamah, meaning the place. So mashhud is a place, and shahid, in this case from the tafseer, that it is a person. There is another opinion that shahid and mashhud here refers to the ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam and the rest of the ummah. Right? So we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam in the Quran, and speaks about how we will be a witness for the other anbiya that came before. that we will stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when their people are denying that they had fulfilled their promise, or they deny that they have given their da'wah, then the ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam will stand up and we will say, Ya Rabbi, Ya Allah, we bear witness to these anbiya. There's a hadith when it comes to Nuh alayhi salam, that Nuh alayhi salam will be brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask him, Hal ballaghd, right? Did you inform your people about me? Did you give them the message that I asked you to give them? And the people will look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they will say, Ya Rabbi, we have never received any message. Right? Like they lie about all of the anbiya. They will say, we never received any message. And Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, he will say, no, he had given his message. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then ask Nabi Nuh, who will be a witness for you? Right? Who will be the shahid for you on this day? And on that day, Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, he will say, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ummatuhu. That the Nabi alayhi salatu wa salam and his ummah, they will be a witness for me. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that we have made you ummatan wasata. Right? That you are just ummah. Not unjust ummah, a just ummah, meaning we will testify for all those who are so-called wrong, all those who are wrong. We will testify for them before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ummata wasata litakunu shuhada'an ala nas. So that you may be a witness to the rest of the ummah that came before. So Al-Imam Al-Tabari, he says when it comes to these ayat that you find, that there is different interpretations, whether it is Yawmul Jum'ah, whether it is the people that make salah on Yawmul Jum'ah, and in Yawmul Jum'ah, whether it is the Hujjaj in Arafah, whether it is the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam and Yawm al-Qiyamah, whether it is the Ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam and the rest of the Ummahs, he says that we accept all of it. Because every single one of it is possible. Every single one of these interpretations is possible. And therefore, Imam Tabari, and this is something he generally goes with, that he says that when you find ayat that there is more than one explanation or more than one understanding, you accept all of the understandings that is there. Because at the end of the day, we don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is the concrete truth behind it. We have an interpretation, yes, of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is through endless years of studying of ulama and sacrificing their lives and so on. But at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أُوتِيتُ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, that you have only been given a small amount of knowledge. Right? So even when it comes to the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam in a hadith, we know that the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says more, it means more than what he says. So you can imagine when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will try and gain and come close to Allah's interpretation or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's meaning to these ayat. But at the end of the day, the true meaning belongs to Allah alone. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it alone. So, Imam Tabari says we accept all of it. And you know what is strange is that on the day of Qiyamah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks the Ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam to bear witness for Nabi Nuh, it is not that we were present at the time, right? None of the people of the Ummah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam was present in the time of Nabi Nuh. How is it that we going to bear witness for people that we have not been, or we have not seen, right? We didn't even live in their time. So, the ulama of Tafseer, they say that the part that we're going to be witness of is that this Quran that we have, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the truth. And because of the truth of the Quran, we are going to be witness against him. The same thing happened with Khuzaymah, one of the Sahaba. It says one day the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, he came across this man that was selling this horse. And he asked the man, look, sell the horse to me. I will pay you tomorrow. And the man says, yes, no problem. So the next day come, and they say that it's as if this man now changed his mind, that he had gotten, a higher price for this horse. So he comes to the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam and he says, look, are you going to buy this horse for me for this price, or should I sell it to someone else? So the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam looks at him and says, what do you mean? I already bought it from you. Right? You have already given me your word that I have bought it, you're going to bring it, I'll give you the money, you go. It's mine. And he says, no, we haven't agreed on anything. And the Nabi says, Bala, we did. We made an arrangement. And again he says, no, we didn't. And the Nabi ﷺ says, no, but you are mistaken. We did have an arrangement. And then he says to the Nabi ﷺ, Man yashhadu laka? Who is going to be a witness for you? Who is going to testify that this what you are saying indeed happened yesterday? So Khuzaymah, he then lifts his hand up and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I will be a witness. The Nabi ﷺ looks at him and says, how are you going to be a witness? You weren't here. You weren't present when we were having this deal, this conversation between us. How are you going to be a witness for something that you don't know? And he says, Ya Rasulullah, I will be a witness that you are indeed a truthful person. And that you will not lie in order to steal this person's horse. So he bear witnesses to the Nabi ﷺ's truth that he speaks. That the Nabi ﷺ is honest in what he's saying. And in doing so, the Nabi ﷺ praises him and then makes his testimony, meaning when he testifies for someone, the Nabi ﷺ makes it equivalent to two people testifying. Because of the way this man had gone about it. Jamaatul Muslimin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَجْمُوعٌ لَهُ النَّاسِ وَذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَشْهُودٌ. That when it comes to this day of Qiyamah, it is a day that every single person will be gathered for. Alright? Every single human being that has ever lived and died, we will be gathered together on one plane for the sake of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَشْهُودٌ. And from this ayah, the ulama, they say that mashhood here refers to the day of Qiyamah. In the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Ashabul Ukhdud. And Ashabul Ukhdud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُتِلَ Ashabul Ukhdud. Whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term in the Quran, qutila, right? And you will find it in a lot of places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term qutila. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or at least what the ulama of tafseer have come to the understanding is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that word qutila because qutila means to be killed, right? That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that word qutila, it means that they have been cursed. Right? Meaning they have been cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah says qutila ashabul ukhdud, mean that those people, ukhdud means, ukhdud is like a big hole in the ground. Right? And we will get to the story behind it now. But ukhdud is big holes in the ground that you dig up. Right? So ashabul ukhdud are those people who had dug those holes. And when Allah says qutila ashabul ukhdud, mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cursed those people. Now, there used to be a king, and we're going to end up with the story, that lived before. And this king, he had a wizard, a sahir with him. And this sahir would manipulate the jinn and so on in order to, help the king in his kingdom. And what the sahir used to do was, he used to send the jinn around and listen to people's conversations and so on, the things that they're doing. And they would come back to him and they would inform him and he would inform the king. And when the people come before the king, he would tell them, you said so on and so on and so on, and you did this and that and that. And the people will be, in shock. How did he know these things? And he says, I am your Lord. I am your Lord. I know what is going on around you. All right? So this sahir, this magician, he used to help the king for many years. And then one day he became old and he told the king, look, I'm reaching a stage and age where I fear I might die soon. Let me take in an apprentice. I will teach him the ways and then he can serve you from there onwards. So the king agrees. He says, okay, find a young boy, teach him how to do it. So the king, the sahir, he finds this boy and he tells this boy, look, I'm going to teach you. And obviously the sahir was someone that was looked up to in the kingdom. It was someone that had status there. So everybody was, happy to be in his company. So he tells this boy, look, I'm going to start teaching you these things. And you will then serve the king after me. He says, okay. So the first day comes and the sahir is busy with teaching the boy. And when they are done, the boy, he gets up and he starts leaving on his way home. While he's walking home, he comes across a rahib, right? He comes across an obedient servant of Allah. And he sees these strange things this man is doing, worshipping Allah, making salah in whichever way he did. Some form that something of what he was doing was strange to this boy, and he wanted to know, what is this about? So he goes to the rahib, and the rahib starts teaching him about iman. Starts teaching him about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is the Lord of all mankind. And when the rahib tells him, he asks the rahib, what are you doing? He says, I'm worshipping my Lord. He says, the king? He says, no, I'm worshipping my Lord, your Lord, and the king's Lord. So he starts to teach this boy, and days go by, weeks go by, months go by, and the boy starts running between the sahir, right? The magician, and the rahib. And there he's learning magic, and here he's learning about iman. So one day, this huge animal enters the kingdom, and everybody is running from it. And this boy decides, you know what, today I'm going to find out whether the sahir is the path that I should follow, or whether the rahib is the path I should follow. So he picks up a stone, and he makes dua, and he says, Ya Allah, if the path to the rahib is going to lead me to a better place, the imam is going to lead me to a better place, then let this animal die. But if the path that the magician wants me to follow is better for me, then let it live. And he makes this dua, and he throws the stone, and this animal dies. And immediately he starts to realize that his path to iman is more important than his path to this magic. And when he now goes back to the imam and he tells him about what had happened, the imam tells him, listen, you are going to be tested, without a doubt. You have reached a point in your iman that is beyond me. And you are going to be tested. But when you are tested, don't tell anybody about me. And the boy agrees, and he goes. And when the boy used to come back from the sahir, he used to have these bruises on him. And this imam asked him, why is it that you have these bruises? He says, no, every time when I'm sitting by you, I end up being late by him. So he punishes me because I came there late. So the imam tells him, when you go to the rahib, tell him that your family kept you back so you couldn't be there in time. And when your family starts complaining that you are late coming back home, tell them that the magician kept you back so you couldn't be there in time. And it goes on like this for a while. And then eventually it gets to the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this boy the ability to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and heal people through it. So one of the, what do you call those people? One of the senators, right? Or mayors or so on, right? The king's advisors. He became blind. He had an illness and he became blind. And he heard about this person that was healing everybody. So he took all of the riches that he has and he went to this boy. And he comes there and he sits down and he says, all of this riches that you see here, it is all for you if you can heal me. And the boy says, it is not me that heals, but it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that heals. And he starts to tell him about Islam, he starts to tell him about Iman, he starts to tell him about worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that the only way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to heal you is for you to accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your Lord. In other words, Islam. All right? You surrender your life to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you surrender your affairs to Allah. And he then believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he is cured. And he can see. And he goes back to the king, and while he's sitting with the king sees this man's eyes is working. How did this happen? And he asks him, what happened to your eyes? He says, my Lord has cured me. He says, me? He says, no, not you. My Lord, your Lord. All of our lords. The Lord of this world has cured me. And this king decides, you know what, I'm going to take you and interrogate you and see, where is this that you come on this stuff? So he punishes him and tortures him, does all of these different ways of torture to him, to the point where he now gives up the boy. And the king he sends his men to go find the boy, and they take the boy and they punish the boy as well, torture him, until he gives up the rahib, right? Until he gives up the salih man. And the king brings the man before him, and they put this, almost like a guillotine. Right? A guillotine that you used to have back in the day, chop the people's heads off as it fall. Something similar. And the king tells him, go back on your Islam. In other words, say that I am Allah. Say that I am your Lord. And the Salih man, he says, I will never do so. And they drop the thing on him and cut him in half. Then they bring the minister there as well. Go back on your deen, go back on your iman and say that I am your Lord. The minister says, I cannot do that as well. And they drop it on him and they kill him as well. Chop him in half. Then the king decides, you know what? I don't want to kill this boy in front of all these people, because they gathered everybody there in order to see this whole thing take place. He says, I don't want to kill this boy in front of all these people because he helped a lot of them. They might just rebel against me because of the fact that I decided to kill him. So the king tells his men, take the boy on a boat, and when you're in the middle of the ocean, throw him in and we will say that he drowned. And his soldiers take the boy and they go into the ocean. And when they reach the center, the boat starts to, shake. And everybody falls off the boat except the boy. And he goes back to the king. King asks, what happened? He says, everybody just fell off. And I came back. The king says, okay. Next group of men take him to the highest mountain and throw him off from on top there. We will say he fell off. Goes up by the mountain starts shaking. All of them fall off except him. He comes walking back to the king. The king don't know what to do with this boy. So the boy then tells him, I will tell you how to get rid of me. And he tells the king, tie me to a palm tree, let everybody be there, the entire kingdom. Let every single person be there. Tie me to a tree and take one of my arrows that I have. One of my arrows, take it. And when you lift this arrow up, then you say, Bi-ismi Rabbil Ghulam. You say, in the name of the boy's Lord. Right? In the name of this boy's Lord. And as the king lifts up the arrow and he says it and he shoots the boy, and the narration goes that it gets him here in between his eye and his ear. And the boy holds his face and he dies and the king leaves. And when everybody now hear this king saying, by the name of this boy's Lord, everybody then believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everybody then decides they're going to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this king, he leaves and his ministers come to him later on and they say, you were so angry with 3 people that was believing in another God. Now you have the entire kingdom that is believing in Allah. And the king then tells them to dig these holes in the ground and fill it up with fuel. Fuel that will burn endlessly. Right? And one by one they bring the people closer to this hole and they tell them, go back to your iman that you had before. In other words, believe in the king again. Leave your belief in Allah. And one by one the people say no. And they throw them in this fire. And the next person come and they ask them again and they throw them in this fire. Right? Imagine this is an entire kingdom we're talking about. Not a couple of 100 people, probably over thousands of people. And they're throwing them constantly into this fire. And there is a narration that one of the children that had spoken in the cradle, meaning as a baby, was a woman that had just given birth recently, that was part of this people. And when she had felt this, this fear for her child, that her child is going to burn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this child the ability to speak. And the child said to the mother, do not worry, for we are on the truth. And because of these words, the mother's iman became strong again, and she fell into that hole, was thrown into that hole, and because, only for one reason, because every single person that was thrown into that hole was thrown in because of their iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, that these people that had built these, that had made these holes, dug these holes, and these people that had thrown the Muslimin into these holes, that they are indeed cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jamaatul Muslimin, inshallah ta'ala, we will end of then, we'll carry on with the story of these people. But know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made that qasam in the beginning of the surah, that without a doubt, these people that had wronged those who had iman in their heart, purely and only for the basic reason of believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cursed these people for life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us understanding. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all to benefit from these ayat. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all to be amongst the muttaqeen. Wa min al-muhsinin wa min ibadi salihin. Wa akhir da'wana. And alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.